To hell with the date on your birth certificate. Let's talk about what we have in common across generations. Life, sex, and tech at any age. Welcome to Age Blind with Nancy A. Shenker.
Hey, boys and girls, it's Nancy A. Shenker back with another edition of Age Blind, where people of all ages get together to talk about things that they have in common rather than things that divide us. You're never going to hear me talking about Gen Z does this and boomers do that. I'm going to be really focusing on those things that bring us together. And as we enter the holiday season, one of those things is holiday romance and romance in general as a genre. So in keeping with my theme of Age Blind and how I podcast, I always begin with some facts for those people who might not believe some of the topics that I've picked. So if you speak with facts and consumer sentiment, you can never be wrong. That was a quote that I borrowed from one of my marketing professors at Kellogg from many, many years ago, and it's a timeless truth. So here are my 7 interesting facts about rom-com as a category. Hallmark launched its first rom-com back in 1951, so it's a genre that clearly has withstood the test of time. And now what's fascinating is that Hallmark viewership is now up to 80 million. That's 80 million people who admit to watching at least a few minutes of rom-coms. The Hallmark Channel brings in as much as $350 million in ad revenue. So it's a pretty lucrative genre. And this season, they're launching 41 new movies. And those movies are mostly holiday romances with a few others thrown in because Hallmark also has a family channel, which is more generic. And interestingly, a mystery channel, because the reality is women who watch rom-coms also tend to watch true crime. And I did an episode about true crime last year. It's a very, very popular category across all ages of women. There's a great article from the New York Times. If anybody would like me to send it to them, just email me at Nancy A. Shenker, Shenker @gmail.com, and I'll send you the link. But it's basically an analysis of all the Hallmark movies that have run and the themes that they have in common, which I was explaining to a girlfriend the other day. It's typically a driven, successful woman who finds herself out in the country and then falls in love with a guy who's either a lumberjack or a businessman who's dressed as a lumberjack, but it's very, very formulaic. And yet, like soap operas and other forms of reality TV, they're really engaging stories. My daughters and I have now made a holiday tradition of watching Hallmark holiday movies together when we get together over the holiday season. So now let's shift a little bit of genres. Let's shift to books. And romance books represent a whopping $1.4 billion in sales. So even though people aren't reading as much as they used to, they are reading in the genre. And what's interesting too is that there have been spin-offs of the romance genre. So not only are there romantic books, there are now fantasy romances. There are romances featuring vampires. I had a guest on last year who talked about romance and erotica targeted at women over 50. And then sports romances are now becoming a thing. So without further, those are my 7 facts about romance in general. And I'm now going to turn things over to my wonderful guest today, who, as she just said, is a rabbi by day and a romance novelist by night. It's Nola St. James, also known as Rabbi Joe David. So welcome to the show today, Nola.
Yes. You know, Nancy, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to speaking with you since this was set up, and I think we have so much to talk about. But what you just said, Nola, I have not quite figured out for myself who I am. I've been Rabbi Joe, and I've been Joe for most of my adult life.
And how old are you, if you don't mind my asking?
I'm 75.
Awesome. Cool.
So I always wanted to write novels. I've been a writer all my life. And when I was 3, my parents put me in front of an old Remington typewriter, and I have a picture of myself in front of that typewriter with a little hat on, typing away. So they set me on the track. They also named me after Joe March in Little Women.
Love that.
So I couldn't become anything else except a writer, but I've written in a variety of genres, a variety of different formats, but I always wanted to write novels. And novels take time, and they take a lot of focus. And it's very hard if you're raising a family and you have a husband and you have a kid and you're trying to build a career. And it's very hard to put together the amount of time that is necessary to sustain a novel.
And we also, in our generations, we didn't have famous female novelists who are role models. So, look at, what's her name, who wrote the Harry Potter series? She's a multimillionaire. But when you and I were growing up, writers were those raggedy people who lived up in attics and starved to death. And they're really Lois Lane, who followed Clark Kent around. There were not a whole lot of role models of successful, wealthy, badass women writers. And this next generation has many more of those women to look at and say, I could be a novelist and I can be wealthy. I don't have to choose just one.
Right. Now, I'm not sure about the wealthy part. And I think even very established writers will tell you that the wealth is something that they're maybe still waiting for. But publishing has changed so much in the last 10 years that this, the scene that I always think of in when I think about writing and what a writer's life is the scene in the wonderful movie version with Katharine Hepburn of Little Women, where at the very end, Professor Bear comes to her and he's got this book and he says, I gave this to my friend who's a publisher, and he publishes it, and he has great hopes for it. And
I remember that.
Right? Oh. And it's raining, and it's fabulous. And that's what I thought would happen. Somehow you get your novel into someone's hands, and they say, oh, this is the best thing that I ever saw, and they publish it, and
I know that is not true. And what I discovered, my path was similar to yours. I'd never been a rabbi, but I spent a lot of years in corporate life, and I would write advertising copy and I would write emails, but the writer thing always burned in my soul. And so I've discovered, and even now at 68, I'm still pretty actively working by writing about really boring stuff, or what people would consider boring. I don't find it boring. Business, technology, trends. I have been able to make enough money doing that it fuels my writing about things that I really want to write about. So, maybe the reality is that because publishing still is not a super lucrative profession, it's something that you aspire to do and have a first or a second career that enables you to make money, raise a family, and then later in life, you become a novelist or a filmmaker. And I've had several guests on who fall into that category, who in their 60s and 70s left corporate careers and became late life novelists. So why do you think that so many women are consumed with this genre, that they love rom-coms?
Well, it's very interesting that you bring that up. Rom-coms are aspirational. If you think about what most women want to do with their lives when they're teenagers, they rarely get to do those things as adults for all kinds of reasons, which is not to say they don't have wonderful lives, but their most romantic feelings and aspirational feelings about what their life should be like rarely comes true. I think that's why women love to watch or read rom-coms, because those women, the women in those stories, do the things that they thought they were going to do, or they wish they could do. Or they learn by watching these how to do those things better in their own lives. When I started working on what I think of as the NOLA St. James Project, which is about 8 years ago, I have a wonderful creative partner, James Gaynor, who was an editor at Grosset and Dunlap. And he read my first novel, my first Regency novel, Curse of the Ravenscroft Brides, and he said, "This is publishable. We should get an editor. We should get an agent. We'll get it published." And that kind of started us off. Well, by the time we got it to an agent, which was about 2 years ago, we realized that we weren't going to get an immediate answer. And after 2 months of waiting for the phone to ring, he and I both got very bored because we're both the same age. We're both in our mid-70s. We don't have time to wait for some agent to pick this up and then spend a couple of years selling it to one of the big five and then wait for another 2 years. We have stories to tell. We have stories we want to share, and you can't do that in traditional publishing. So we formed an association, and I put up a website at the Regency World of NOLA St. James, and the brand is about aspirational lifestyles, how to live a Regency life in the 21st century.
Love that. Yeah, and I'm self-published as well, having worked. My first corporate job and my last corporate job were in the publishing industry. And like you, I'm like, who has the patience? And who wants to be judged by this team of old white men? No offense to any old white men who are listening, but I know my books are good, so I'm just going to publish them myself and sell them on Amazon. And yes, would I love to be the next Stephen King or have a Harry Potter series? Yeah, I'd love the money. But I would, when you have stories to tell and you want to get them out there, it's sometimes it's just better because the technology exists to bring your book to life without going through the bureaucracy.
And of course, the other thing is, going back to why we love rom-coms, is this is specifically what rom-coms tell us to do. If you want to do something, do it. Don't wait for other people to hand it to you.
Love that.
That other people can judge accurately how your story will communicate itself. I was listening to the podcast you did about the woman who writes the hot romance.
Oh, yeah, Stella Fosse. Yeah.
Stella Fosse. Thank you.
Yeah.
So Stella Fosse was talking about ageism in publishing.
Yep.
And 25 years ago, I had a great idea for a book, and I went to someone I knew who's a big deal at a major agency. And I said, this is a great idea. I can do this. What do you think? And she said, unfortunately, you're not 35 and a man. And I was devastated because so what? I still had a good story to tell. But that was the first time that I really ran up against that. And then when I started the NOLA project, there were people around me who said, well, we're going to have to hide how old you are. We're going to have to hide that you're a rabbi. We're going to have to hide that you live in New York. There are all the things that they wanted to hide. And I said, that has nothing to do with the story. And the stories will succeed or fail on their own, but I think they're going to succeed. And Midnight Miracle, which is our Christmas book. And everybody faints when they say, how could a rabbi write a Christmas book? It's Christmas for marketing purposes.
Oh, yeah. And the spirit of the season, the reality is the majority of people in our country are Christian, and even Jews get into the Christmas spirit. And the genre, whether it's Hanukkah, whether it's Christmas, I don't know if you've been watching the TV show that's doing super, super well called Nobody Wants This, about Kristen Bell plays a non-Jewish woman who falls in love with a rabbi. Romance is romance is romance, regardless of your age, your gender, the color of your skin. It just happens to be watched more by women of all ages than by men, although I think a lot of women get their husbands, significant others watching shows like The Golden Bachelor, Golden Bachelorette, 90 Day Fiancé, and then they get hooked. I had the pleasure of meeting Sean Robinson last week. She's the host on the 90 Day Fiancé Tell-All. And we were joking about how a lot of women will insist that their boyfriends, husbands, significant others, guy friends sit with them to watch these shows. And then they're the modern day soap opera. They become hooked. So congratulations. You really seem to be onto something. And so many of my guests have been both young people and older people who are pursuing a dream after having been told it's going to be too difficult, it's going to take too much time. And that's really why I have this podcast, is to inspire my listeners and my viewers with people like you who really at any stage in their lives are reinventing and following their passions. So do you have any things that you would say are like a big surprise or a funny, relevant story that our listeners might want to hear as it relates to starting down the road of writing or producing rom-coms?
Well, I think one of the most important things that I've learned is that as a rabbi, I was in marketing and advertising before I went to rabbinical school. So I was a second career rabbi, and I've been a rabbi for over 30 years. But I spent a good chunk of time, about 12 years, in advertising and marketing. So I was always focused on how you do things right, and being concerned about how I was perceived, certainly as a rabbi. People, you could put yourself in a black sack and stand on a stage, and people would come to you and not say anything, and people would come to you and tell you what's wrong with you. That's what I learned being a rabbi. No matter what you do, you can never please people, because when it comes to clergy, people tend to project onto clergy whatever it is that's bothering.
Well, so that's a double whammy, because marketers are usually the target when people don't get results. So right. You clearly are a glutton for punishment on many levels.
Oh, yes. But what happened to me when I started writing seriously and we started working on producing these books was that I felt free. I felt a type of liberation that I've never felt in my life. I feel completely integrated. I feel I have struggled with anxiety and depression, and suddenly it's gone.
Wow.
It is completely gone. And I think it's because, first of all, I'm doing something that I love. And also because, as someone said on Facebook, writers are people with too many imaginary friends. And I live with a lot of imaginary friends. Even when I'm writing, I'm thinking about the next book and the characters. I'm very concerned in the book Curse of the Ravenscroft Bride, the first book that I wrote, which is going to come out in January. The heroine who goes into the second book eventually gets married and gets pregnant, And this poor woman has been pregnant for 5 years. And I'm really concerned about her. Plus, there's another character, an older woman, who has been reunited with the love of her life, who she thought was lost at sea, and she's pregnant, and no one knows. So I'm very concerned about those storylines. And it's such fun. I'm having so much fun, and it's liberated me to do things like, for example, I saw Mallory Lewis on Instagram with Lamb Chop one day, and they were talking about how can Lamb Chop be alive when Shari is not.
For those listeners who don't have any idea what we're talking about, Shari Lewis predated Sesame Street as one of the original puppeteers, and the fact that she was a woman also made her unusual. And she had a puppet called Lamb Chop that she would interact with, and her daughter is alive and well and has kept the Shari Lewis Lamb Chop thing going. So for those of you who were born after the Shari Lewis era, just Google it. There are some really funny clips on YouTube, and that is what our generation grew up watching. We had 3 channels, and that was our Sesame Street, with Shari Lewis and Lamb Chop.
And the thing about Lamb Chop is she's a 5-year-old who has no filters. So she looks at the world with awe and wonder and the sense of, she'll say anything. She doesn't say anything dirty, or she'll be a little tiny sexy in the way that 5-year-olds can say sexy things. So I saw this clip, and I called my publicist, and I said, I have to do something with Mallory and Lamb Chop, because I could really see myself, Rabbi David, having conversations with Mallory and Lamb Chop about all kinds of feelings. And I had this great idea. And Marla reached out to Mallory and sent her anxiety. It's interesting that I do that once in a while. It's anarchy at Almax. Occasionally becomes anxiety at Almax. I think because Bedlam in Bath and Chaos in Cardiff, books are still waiting to be written, and the deadlines are coming up. So, but she sent her Anarchy at Almax, and Mallory loved it and said, let's do an Instagram Live, the 3 of us, with Nola, and we talked about the book, and she did it. It was a beautiful piece, and she 17 minutes, which for Instagram Live is very long. But that was the basis of the beginning of a little friendship between Mallory and I. Are some years apart, but we have. I think that we were born of the same mother.
And you hit on a few things that I think are really powerful. One is, as you get older, there are a lot of people who are afraid of aging, but I have also found it very liberating, because you spend the first part of your life building a career, in some cases raising kids or a family, having all of these financial and life pressures. And by the time you get to your 60s or 70s, you don't give a shit anymore, to be perfectly honest. And I learned that from my 95-year-old mother, who was, the rabbi who was going to officiate at her funeral asked her if she was afraid of dying. And my mother's like, no, why would I be afraid? Like, I've spent 95 years on earth. It's going to happen eventually. So, just living your best life until you can't anymore. And the average age for women these days is 87. So we still have at least a couple of good decades left. So we have a couple of good decades left, but we're almost at the end of our recording time. So this has been really, really wonderful. And what are some of your favorite, other than your own books, what are some of your favorite rom-coms or movies? And what do you see as the future of the genre being? I mean, I don't see it slowing down anytime soon. The viewership on Golden Bachelor and Golden Bachelorette is off the charts. I have so many guests who've been on my podcast who are making movies or writing books well after 50. and just looking at the stats that I presented earlier, this is a hot category. But there are all of these spin-off categories like sports romances and vampire romances. Anything else that you see coming down the pike in the romance category?
You mentioned romantasy in the intro.
Yep.
Romantasy is, I didn't know that I was writing romantasy when I wrote Curse of the Ravenscroft Buds. It's about the hero is a man who can turn into a raven. And it creates problems, as you might imagine, in his love life. When I wrote it, and my husband and some other people read it, they said, well, is this exactly a romance? And I said, yeah, the boy meets girl, boy and girl have issues, and they resolve them, and
look at Superman and Spider-Man. I mean, this category, there's always been an element of romance in every superhero movie. So why not?
That's right. Now, in Midnight Miracle, which I would be remiss if I didn't say that we've just been picked up by Blackstone Publishing for the audiobook, which has been recorded by Mallory Lewis. As a result of that friendship, we're very excited, and it's going to be out in a couple of weeks. So on all platforms and everywhere, audiobooks are sold. So I'm very excited about that. The reason she's so perfect for this is that the romantasy aspect is the fantasy aspect is based on a Norwegian legend that animals can talk in the human tongue on Christmas Eve. And so there are all these different animals, including 3 cats, whom Mallory will voice. And the heroine goes to her friends in the barn on Christmas Eve to find out the name of her true love.
Love that.
So you have this fantasy and what happens because the animals can talk, but it doesn't mean they can say everything they'd like to. But Mallory did a spectacular job with the audiobook, and we're so happy with it.
So again, just because you come from a marketing background, if you can just tell our viewers and our listeners where they can find you. You mentioned you have a website. Give us the URL again, please.
It's NolaSt.James.com. I'm also on Facebook as Nola St. James and on Instagram as Nola St. James, and hopefully one day on TikTok. And my books are on both Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com, and the audiobook will be available everywhere.
And as I mentioned earlier, one of the things that I discovered as a mother of 2 grown daughters is that, we sometimes argue about various things, as all mothers and daughters do. But this past summer, they recommended to me Emily Henry's novels. And we have our own little mother-daughter book club where we've been reading her novels and waiting for her first movies to come out. And it's become a family tradition. Even though I was raised Jewish, my older daughter is Catholic, my younger daughter is undeclared, but watching Hallmark rom-coms is something that brings us all together every holiday season. And I'm actually going to add your book to our rotation this holiday season and make it a mother-daughter moment.
Thank you. The thing about Midnight Miracle is that it's a clean romance, which means that there's no explicit sex. And I did that especially because I wanted it to be something that anyone from 13 to 130 could.
Love that. And that's who my audience is for my podcast. And now a minute of self-promoting Age Blind. We just rebranded in October. The podcast had been called The Geezer Proofer, and most of my guests were over 50. But then I realized that I was myself being ageist by restricting the listenership or the viewership to that segment of the market. So now and heading into next year, I'm really going to be all about intergenerational collaboration. And you and I, Joe, are a decade apart. I also want young women to see us and realize that life is not over when you hit 50 and you don't need to start shooting up your face with chemicals and getting down to 20 pounds. Like you can eat a hamburger and fries because the weight's going to come on anyway. So you might as well enjoy life healthily, which is my one objection to the Golden Bachelorette. This woman is just way too skinny, and it sets a bad example for other 61-year-old women who feel compelled to be stick thin because it's stressful. Anyway, I digress. But you can listen to Age Blind on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you happen to get your podcast. And if you'd like to see us, we are on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel so you'll automatically see new episodes as they come up. And if you'd like to be a guest, we're booking guests now for January and beyond of 2025. So it's Nancy A. Shenker, Shenker, @gmail.com. And you could follow me on all of my social media sites, except for TikTok. I'm not there yet either, but I will be in 2025. And currently I'm on social media as The On Switch, TheonSwitch, which is my marketing company. But come next year, I am going to be splitting my personality, and people could either follow me as a individual human or me as a professional. They're all one person, but I've learned I've had to become a shapeshifter, just like you have your pen name and your rabbi name. So although I'm not a rabbi, I will have a rabbi name and a creative name. So thank you for the inspo, as they say. You have been a wonderful, wonderful guest, Rabbi Joe / Nola St. James, and you also have picked up a new fan.
Thank you so much. I look forward so much to hearing how you and your daughters like the book.
All right. Thank you so much. And take care. And remember, everybody who's listening or watching, remember, as you go forward in your day-to-day lives, be age blind. Peace out.
Yes.